Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here to speak today. It's a real opportunity, I think, for me to be able to talk to an audience like yourself that comprises of waste producers and waste managers from across the private and the public sector. So really pleased to be here. I have quite an emotive and provocative presentation title, and I'll come back to that in a second. But before I do that, I would just say that by working at the Environment Agency, I manage a national team of around 60 people who look after how the Environment Agency approaches waste regulation. So right from the point of issuing permits, and we do that across a wide range of regulatory regimes, so including non-site based ones, for example, hazardous waste, carriers, brokers, dealers, producer responsibility and international waste shipments. We also go out and do compliance work, and we get involved in enforcement where people fail to comply with the terms of the permit or indeed do not have a permit at all. So hopefully today I can shine a light on some of the work that we are doing in relation to waste crime. And the title, I should explain, comes from an interview that our Chief Executive, Sir James Bevan, had with The Guardian last autumn. And I'm sure you've all been there, or you've opened up the newspaper and seen something that your Chief Executive has said and thought, it's going to be 6 months of my life sorting that one out. I shouldn't be facetious, because obviously I would never question anything that our Chief Executive says or does, for the record. But having said that, I think actually, whilst it was a provocative statement, it's a really interesting parallel to make. And the presentation that I'm going to give today, I hope, will give you the opportunity to answer that question for yourself and come to your own conclusion on whether or not it is fair to actually compare waste crime to the trade in illegal narcotics. So, as a regulator, this is what we sometimes see. So this is what poor performance and waste crime in the waste management sector looks like. A poorly run waste site has a massive impact on the community around it. You know this, through the smells it produces, the noise, the vermin it attracts. And waste crime, including things like misdescription, illegal waste shipments and illegal disposal, has an even bigger impact than that, because not only does it have those effects on the environment and communities that live close to those sites, it also has an impact on the economy. And we know that the cost of illegal waste activity or waste crime is extremely significant. A few years ago, the Environmental Service Association, working with UNOMIA, released a report that said the cost to the UK of waste crime is in the region of £1 billion per year. That estimate does vary, but it's a reasonable ballpark figure to be working with. So this is quite a significant issue. So, in the Environment Agency, we take waste crime very seriously. As I say, it can cause serious pollution to the environment, it puts communities at risk, it undermines legitimate business and the investment and economic growth that go with that. We are determined to make life hard for criminals. We want to support legitimate business by disrupting and stopping the criminal element, and backing that up with a threat of more tough enforcement action and prosecution. And I'm really glad that people are here today that can talk about sentencing, for example. Now, I should say that waste crime is at the extreme end of the spectrum of behaviours that we see, and it's really, really misleading to conflate the waste industry with waste crime, and I do think that sometimes happens because waste crime is the sort of sexy end of it from a regulatory point of view. As I say, it is the extreme end of the spectrum, and there is a real difference between the legitimate operators who are running their sites for better or worse, running their activities for better or worse, and people who have deliberately entered the waste market with the intention of committing criminality. There is a difference. I would add to that the vast majority of the waste sites that we regulate are well run. So according to the way that we assess performance at regulated sites, 96% of waste sites that we regulate do come into that good performance band, and they provide a much needed service. And I want to say that because I don't think that's a message that always gets out into the public about the waste sector. Having said that 4% of waste sites that are not well run is still relatively high compared to other sectors. So what we see there is we see things like multiple pollution incidents from those sites, sort of amenity issues that I mentioned, a lot of community interest, and waste fires as well. So we do need to focus on that. Some good news though, of the 11,500 permitted sites that we regulate in the Environment Agency, performance is is improving all the time. So serious pollution incidents on the decrease, poorly performing sites fell by 20% between 2014 and 2015, and persistent poorly performing sites, those that have caused a problem for 2 years or more, fell by 6% as well. So again, by and large, the sector is not as bad as it's painted, and it's improving. There is, of course, a but, and the but is around the illegal waste side, the waste crime side of the world that we see. So during last year, we found over 1,000 new illegal waste sites, and around 25% of those remain currently active. We stopped as many as we found, and we're getting better at doing that in the Environment Agency actually. We stopped something like 4 to 5 illegal waste sites a week, and over 50% of the illegal waste sites we find close down within 90 days. But essentially the problem, wherever we look, we find them, and they are opening up as quickly as we are finding them. Aligned to that, fly tipping is also on the increase, so not the kind of serious and significant big bad and nasty stuff that we deal with, but the fly tipping that the local authority deals with is also on the increase. So I think that means that there is a public perception around illegal waste, because what people are seeing is more and more illegal deposits. So that's the illegal waste sites. In relation to misdescription of waste, so people describing waste as something other than it actually is, usually something more hazardous, less hazardous rather. We undertook a project during 15-16 to really look at this in more detail, and we identified over 630,000 tonnes of misdescribed waste from 60 sites, and we referred those sites to HMRC because of the tax evasion aspect of it. And HMRC discovered that those 60 sites had a potential landfill tax revenue value of £18 million. So again, this is quite a significant issue, and what we do find is where we look, we find a problem. There are some specific characteristics of the waste sector which I think contribute to this. And as I say, I'm differentiating here between the legitimate operators and those that have deliberate criminal intent. But the fact that the sector is fragmented doesn't help. The fact that there is a cash at the gate model doesn't help. The business is cost driven, and many operators, many waste producers will seek to avoid unnecessary costs unless they are prompted to by sanctions. I mean, that is a fact of what we deal with. The waste sector as well is quite unique in many ways, and it's populated by small and medium-sized businesses, which often, and I don't want to make any sweeping generalisations, but often do not have the levels of corporate and social responsibility that we see in bigger companies, particularly in bigger waste operators. Similarly, their ability to buffer themselves against market forces is limited, and that means that there is an end of the waste crime spectrum, if you like, which is not people that deliberately entered the market with the intention of committing criminal acts, but have just found themselves in a position where their business model is actually unsustainable, and so you start cutting corners, and it's a sort of thin end of the wedge, if you like. So, our vision for waste in the Environment Agency, very, very simple. Waste is minimised, and waste that is produced is managed in the right place by the right people. That is it. Breaking it down into what that means, there are 3 objectives really for the way that we are going about regulating in the waste sector. That is, our regulated customers take greater responsibility for their environmental performance. We reduce crime and tackle poor performance in the waste sector. And we work with industry, and by that I mean both waste operators, waste managers and waste producers, to ensure that waste is correctly described, treated and managed to safeguard communities, the environment and contribute to economic growth. So that is our philosophy, that is what we're trying to achieve. And I say that just because I want you to understand that for us it is bigger than just the waste crime stuff. So what are we doing to tackle waste crime? Well, the first thing is we're taking really tough regulatory action. And you may hear this concept of the T-junction conversation. I do that quite a lot. And what that basically means is that when we're talking to either somebody who's deliberately committing criminality or somebody who is operating a poorly performing site, you get to the T-junction point where you say, you can improve or we will close you down, but there is no straight on. And we are taking that robust regulatory response in some way, partly in response to the social and political intolerance that has been increasing over the years of poor performing sites and waste crime. So particularly on the political side of it, what I've seen in the few years that I've been involved in this is a real political appetite that this will no longer be tolerated. So I want us to be seen as a firm but fair regulator that essentially, supports the sector to do the right thing, but takes tough action where tough action needs to be taken. And we target high priority crime types, so illegal waste sites, non-compliant exemptions. Some operators operate under the, I guess it's a legitimate veneer of having an exemption, but actually have no intention of complying with the terms of that exemption. Deliberate misdescription and illegal waste export. So that's where we focus our efforts in terms of the crime types. And we do focus on priority waste types as well. At the moment, there is a real issue, particularly with construction, demolition and excavation waste, largely driven in the southeast by the housing boom, the construction boom there. So we're seeing a lot more of that, as I believe local authorities are as well. So the second part of our approach is around evolving our regulatory approach. So we are moving towards prevention and disruption. So we still take prosecutions and that will always be part of our regulatory arsenal, if you like. But we're evolving our approach to do more around disruption. We're finding that, fairly obviously, it is easier to stop a problem becoming really big by stopping the trucks that are taking that waste to the illegal site than having to wait until the illegal site becomes a problem and then going and enforcing. Now, I really want to do a lot more about publicising this because I think people are interested in it, but also there is a perception that the Environment Agency must have had its funding cut and therefore no longer does enforcement. And I just want to clear that one up. We haven't had our funding cut. The Treasury have given us additional money from the Landfill Communities Fund to fund action against waste crime. And we are spending that in a lot of different ways, and some of that is looking at new disruption techniques. In terms of evolving our regulatory approach, it's also really important, I think, that we raise the barrier to entry into the waste sector. And what you see, actually, and I've worked across a number of industries, is that the barrier to entry into the waste sector is actually quite low. So DEFRA are running another waste crime consultation later on in the year, which will look at raising those barriers to entry by introducing things like checks around technical competence, financial provision, and operator competence more widely at the permitting stage, so we can make sure that only the right people that we think are going to behave responsibly will get permits. We want to support legitimate business, and we want to work with organisations that can do that. So CIWN have a real part to play, certainly in terms of raising expectations around professionalism in the sector, and ESA have been spearheading the Right Waste, Right Place campaign, which we are really supportive of. As I've said, the waste sector is populated by thousands of small and medium-sized businesses, and it's quite difficult for us to reach them sometimes, but using organisations, partnering with organisations like CIWM and ESA and other trade associations mean that they have, we can use the reach that they have to get some of our regulatory messages across. And the final part of this is working in partnership with other regulators. So there's some key ones there: the Fire and Rescue Service, local authorities, and HMRC. Now, We work with Fire and Rescue Service around waste fires particularly. Local authorities have a massive influence in terms of where they choose to award contracts, and they can and do use that influence. We also have a shared responsibility with local authorities and the Fire and Rescue Service often when a site becomes a problem. So whether if an illegal site crops up or if its sites become abandoned, we have to work together through local resilience forums. So we have a shared interest in making sure that problems don't occur. And with HMRC, again, it's really important that we partner up with them. Waste crime is a financially driven crime. It's all around tax evasion, and we share intelligence on a very regular basis with HMRC. So let's get back to this question then. Is waste crime the new narcotics? So I just wanted to give you an example of a case that we have dealt with relatively recently. And this is around an operator who was jailed in April 2015 for the illegal operation of a waste facility near Burton-on-Trent. And he was required to pay 20,000 quid towards clean-up costs of the site. He then appeared in January 2016 before Birmingham Magistrates Court and was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment because he essentially failed to make any contribution towards those costs that he had been ordered to pay. He had also failed to make any contribution towards compensating the victims of previous offending. So because he made no attempt to do that, the court was left with no choice but to activate the default imprisonment period of 12 months. The outstanding amount payable is going up because it includes interest. Now, this particular character was extremely aggressive and extremely hostile to our officers. We saw repeated offending, and his attitude worsened following our warnings to stop. And what I would say there is, as a regulator, you do expect a bit of rough and tumble when you're giving people messages they don't want to hear. That's absolutely, we understand that. But there are particular people that work in the waste sector, the criminals, I should say, and it's worse than a bit of rough and tumble. What we see is hostility, aggression, and we have had officers assaulted. So, those are the people that we're dealing with here. They are people that are deliberately using threats and intimidation to stop us from doing our work. So we deployed a concrete block at the site entrance to stop this character from depositing more waste. We locked up his piece of land that he was operating on. He broke the locks. We had to get the police involved. Even that didn't deter him. So, as I say, he's currently in prison. When he comes out, he will still owe the money under the Proceeds of Crime Act, and we are currently trying to sell his house to free up his assets to get hold of that money. It is worth saying in relation to this example that there was environmental harm. This stuff was deposited on the land. It has an environmental impact. It has an impact on the community that is around it. But there was also a human victim, and the human victim in this case was the landowner, who was elderly and vulnerable and had leased their land with good intent, and this person had deliberately used their land to commit criminal activity. And that person was so intimidated by what had happened to them that they felt that they had to give evidence behind a screen in court. So there was a human victim in all this. So, if the characteristics of criminality, whether that's the illegal narcotics trade or something else, are deliberate criminal intent, organised gangs, use of hostility and aggression, use of intimidation and violence, just because there's money to be made, well then, perhaps there are parallels between waste crime and the narcotics trade. As I say, I will leave that one to you to make your own minds up on. So, how can you help as legitimate operators, which I'm sure you all are, in terms of producing and managing waste? We always encourage people to report waste crime. We log every report that we get, and we use it to build up intelligence that we then base our major criminal investigations on. We also share that intelligence with our partners, with police, with HMRC and with others. So please use the Crime Stoppers line, phone the Environment Agency. There are several different ways by which you can help stop waste crime. You can also check who you send your waste to and educate your supply chain on their duty of care responsibilities. Duty of care is something that I think we do need to educate more people on. Very few people, in my experience, fully understand their duty of care responsibilities, and there is more that we and others can do on that particular issue, I think. Spread the right waste, right place, right people message, and I would also encourage you to look at the ESA Right Waste, Right Place campaign website as well, because there's lots of good material on there. Thank you very much. If there is time, I'm happy to answer